Imagine unearthing a relic that shatters everything we thought we knew about human history. Recent archaeological discoveries are doing just that, revealing advanced ancient technologies and lost civilizations that challenge our historical timelines. Intriguingly, some of these artifacts and sites appear to have been deliberately buried, raising questions about what past societies might have wanted to conceal or protect. Could these findings point to forgotten knowledge or hidden truths that powerful ancient cultures sought to keep secret?
One of the biggest mysteries in aviation history is the disappearance of Amelia Earhart. And really, it's one of the biggest mysteries in America, really. She went missing during her daring around-the-world flight attempt in 1937. From distress signals to eyewitness accounts and newly discovered photographs, today we're talking about some of the biggest discoveries and theories surrounding Amelia Earhart. Alright, I'm going to start off the list with a very recent discovery. This is actually pretty nuts, very exciting. So the South Carolina Ocean Exploration Company captured a sonar image in the Pacific Ocean that they say seems to be a Lockheed 10E Electra aircraft, the same one Amelia Earhart flew. It was spotted 16,000 feet underwater. It was also about 100 miles away from Howland Island, which was going to be her next stop, along with navigator Fred Noonan. Now, if this is actually Earhart's plane, this would be the answer to a decades-old mystery, but a sad answer. It would mean she didn't vanish or disappear to start a new life somewhere. It would mean she just crashed and died. But it could also bring closure to the whole case, and at the end of the day, her legacy would still live on. It wouldn't change all the accomplishments she made. But let's talk about some other strange stuff that points to the theory that maybe Earhart did survive. Alright, so after Amelia Earhart disappeared, there were reports of her sending out SOS signals and radio messages, as if she were in trouble trying to get help. Now, these distress signals and radio transmissions weren't just heard one time, they kept coming in after she had apparently vanished, as if she was still out there somewhere trying to reach someone. The idea here is that she likely did crash, but might have survived the initial crash and was doing her best to reach out for help. Now again, the implications for this one are kinda dark, just because she may have survived the initial crash, but that doesn't mean she survived, you know? But this next point is a little more uplifting. Sightings of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. Yeah, people have claimed to see these two alive over the years. Numerous individuals claim to have seen her and Fred Noonan alive in various locations. This would point to the theory that Earhart intentionally disappeared in order to start a new life, something that a lot of people really hoped was the case, but many argue that these sightings are really just wishful thinking, tricking people's minds into misidentifying them. And I mean, they may not have even believed what they were saying. It could just be attention seeking. This isn't something that's exclusive to Amelia Earhart. Tons of public figures and celebrities and musicians that died before their time have conspiracies like this surrounding them. You know, Tupac's not dead. I saw him just last week. You know, Kurt Cobain, same deal. People who are inspired by these folks just don't want to believe that they truly are gone. The fact is, Earhart was never found. So she could have survived and started living out of the public eye. You know, it's possible. Again, we have a darker discovery here. Bones. In 1939, several bones were found on Nikamoraro, a remote Pacific island. In 1998, documents from the British Western Pacific High Commission revealed that a work crew of islanders discovered a skull and bones in Gardner Island in 1939. The British suspected these might be Earhart's remains and shipped them to Dr. D.W. Hoodless in Suva, Fiji for identification. Now, at the time, the bones were not believed to be connected with Earhart at all, as they were male bones, but it turns out they were wrong, at least about the bones being male. Decades later, Rick Gillespie sent the measurements recorded by Hoodless to forensic anthropologist Karen Burns at the University of North Carolina. She took the bone measurements and used modern forensic technology, comparing them to estimations of Earhart's bone measurements based on photos of her and her clothing. What she found was that these bones had definitely belonged to a female, and that Earhart was actually a very likely match. The problem is, they didn't have the actual bones to work with, just the measurements. the bones themselves have been lost to time. Again, they ruled them out belonging to Amelia Earhart at the time, so they didn't really care about them. If these bones were still around, scientists would have been able to do actual DNA testing on them. So we're not 100% sure if these bones belonged to her. If these were her remains, though, it means she may have survived a crash and ended up on the island, possibly surviving for at least some time. That's going to bring us to another discovery on that exact same island, part of a shoe. A shoe part was discovered on the same island, an uninhabited island about 1,000 miles north of Fiji. The International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, or the TIGHAR, that really rolls off the tongue, led by Rick Gillespie, found a black rubber shoe heel with an indentation stamped with Cat's Paw Rubber Company USA. Gillespie suspected that this could be a part of Earhart's footwear. The discovery in 1991 also included aluminum airplane parts and plexiglass. Gillespie, believing that the heel and partial sole might have belonged to Earhart, held a press conference, but experts questioned the evidence as the shoe size indicated by the heel was a size 9, seemingly too large for Earhart. Gillespie organized another expedition in 1996. He didn't uncover much except stories from nearby islanders about 2 skeletons found in the late 30s on the island, then called Gardner Island, as we discussed before. Next up, we have the photo. So in 2017, a very interesting photo surfaced, a photo that experts like Sean Henry, the former executive assistant director for the FBI, have assessed and said has not been doctored or tampered with. This photo, which was found in the National Archives and taken in 1937 on the Marshall Islands, seems to show a woman resembling Amelia Earhart and a man believed to be Fred Noonan standing on a dock. Earhart's last communication was on July 2nd of 1937, and she was declared dead 2 years later, presumed to have crashed in the Pacific Ocean. But if this really is Earhart in this photo, she survived. The woman in the picture is short-haired, wearing pants, a characteristic choice of Earhart, and also there is a man resembling Noonan. The guy in the picture has Noonan's same distinctive receding hairline, and the nose looks a little similar. There's also a Japanese ship, a Koshu, in the picture, towing a barge that's a similar length to Earhart's plane, and this is going to lead us into our next point. There's another theory that Earhart was captured. Locals have stories about witnessing Earhart's crash and reported seeing her in captivity. Some believe the Koshu transported her to Saipan and the Mariana Islands, where she may have died under Japanese custody. But Japanese authorities deny having any record of Earhart being in their custody. So the idea here is that Earhart and Noonan survived their crash and were then taken into Japanese custody. The investigative team behind the discovery pointed to the photograph, which was marked Jaluit et al. And dated 1937, and might have been taken by a US spy monitoring Japanese military activity in the Pacific. Now, this one I'm a little skeptical about. Why would they have been taken into custody? Plus, they don't look all that distressed in the photo, but that does lead us to another theory. Why might she have been taken into Japanese custody? Well, another theory is that Amelia Earhart was actually a spy. Yeah, she wasn't just a pilot on a daring trek across the world. She was working for the US government. But what was her mission, you're probably asking? Well, this conspiracy theory is that Earhart had been tasked with documenting and spying on Japanese island installations, but when the Japanese spotted Earhart and Noonan, they either shot them down or forced them to land, where they were then taken into custody. It does connect the dots in the whole photograph thing, but I don't know. This one seems a little outlandish to me, but what do you all think? So if Earhart was taken into Japanese custody, did she die? Well, that's one possibility. Another is that she escaped or was rescued. This would be a pretty good explanation for the new identity conspiracy theory that's pretty famous. If Earhart had been in fear of any further repercussions, she may have been advised to take on a new identity. So in 1970, a book came out called Amelia Earhart Lives, written by Joe Class. In the book, Class proposes that Earhart was rescued from capture and was sent to New Jersey, almost like a witness protection program type situation, where she changed her name to Irene Bolam, a banker. And you know what, I can kind of see the resemblance. I could see her being an older Earhart. Irene Bolam did not approve of the book though. She filed a lawsuit against the publisher denying the claims made in the book, and the book ended up being taken off of shelves. Kind of crazy how some guy seemed to just decide, you know what, I'm gonna write a book about this woman, and because she kind of looks like Amelia Earhart, and I'm just gonna say that she is. You know what? Who knows though? Maybe Bolam really was Earhart, and this guy somehow knew about it, and she just needed to keep her true identity secret. I kind of doubt it though. And the final aspect of the Amelia Earhart mystery is the discovery of wreckage that some researchers have said bears a serious resemblance to her plane. Over the years, there have been sonar images, aside from the most recent one we discussed at the top, and alleged sightings of underwater wreckage that some believe could be Earhart's Lockheed Electra. Some have looked at this wreckage and said it aligns with the known flight path and the disappearance coordinates of her aircraft. I really hope though that this recent discovery sheds more light on this case. I imagine they're going to send a team down to look at the wreckage, if it really is the wreckage of a plane. For now, we'll just have to cross our fingers and wait.
First on our list today, we have the discovery and revival of an ancient virus freed from the Antarctic permafrost after 48,500 years. Oh my gosh, have we learned nothing from sci-fi and television? You do not restore ancient viruses. You don't do it. Well, they did it. The zombie virus was discovered as a result of melting ice in the Antarctic region after laying dormant for tens of thousands of years. And honestly, scientists believe that while the risks are low, much like your ex, it does raise red flags as a potential endangerment to human health. The virus was returned to its former infectious glory in the lab after being inserted with cultured cells. Luckily for us, as of yet, scientists have only attempted to reanimate viruses that target single-cell amoebas, not humans or animals. That's great and all, but it still seems like pretty risky business to me. The scientist who performed the reanimation maintains he has done so to shed light on the potential risk of more dangerous viruses' ability to resurface and affect humans should the Antarctic permafrost continue to melt. Not only that, but as the ice continues to thaw, it also has the potential to release chemical and radioactive waste into our ecosystems. So, think about that. Next up, we have the discovery of a hidden landmass frozen in time and ice and estimated to be bigger than Belgium. The landscape consists of hills and valleys believed to have been carved by ancient rivers over millions of years ago. Its existence was confirmed using a technique called radio echo sounding, which uses sound waves to determine distances based off of which corresponding maps of underground structures and landscapes can be created. Without even laying eyes on an area, we are able to determine the heights of its peaks and the depths of its deepest points. The area of land stretching 32,000 square kilometers, 12,000 square miles, is a scientific marvel, as scientists believe its climate and geology to have been massively different from that of modern-day Antarctica. Which of course brings me to my next point. Also discovered within the ice and hidden beneath the frozen desert were the remains of an estimated 90-million-year-old subtropical rainforest. Scientists were so excited when, deep beneath the ice, they discovered an incredibly well-preserved network of root systems within a sediment core sample. A sediment core sample is basically like a ground extraction that shows all the layers of sediment that have settled over the last, I guess in this case, 90 million years. Not only did they find root systems, but the soil was so well preserved that they were also able to find traces of pollen, spores, and the remains of flowering plants. Based on these findings, it was concluded that the coast of West Antarctica at one point in time contained a thick, swampy rainforest which was home to a large variety of plant and animal species. Scientists also concluded weather patterns of heavy rainfall and heightened levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Next on the list, we have BLOOD Falls. I apologize for having to spell it out for you. I don't think I'm allowed to say that word on here, but just by the look, I'm sure you can guess where the name comes from. So let's talk about the color. If you want to guess how it happens, I'll give you a moment. Maybe pause the video, head to the comments, lock in your answer. You done? Okay, the answer is iron, but not in the way you'd think. The red waters are rich in iron, but they don't actually turn red until they come into contact with the air. Well, maybe you did think that, but let me explain further. It's actually a mix of iron oxides and hydroxides along with high salt content in the water, chlorine and magnesium that give the river flow its yellow, orange and reddish coloring rather than the classic like murky brown we would usually see coming out of eroded sink faucets. Super creepy, but again, super cool. Next up we have the discovery of ancient bacteria like nothing we've ever seen on Earth before. Like, it's so strange, scientists wonder if it might possibly have come from like outer space. Perhaps a passenger on an ancient asteroid that arrived on Earth millions of years ago. And why do they think that? Well, because generally bacteria has a minimum requirement of 6 things it needs in order to survive, and those things are food, acidity, time, generally a warm temperature, oxygen, and moisture. But this bacteria just needs air, making it an absolute scientific anomaly and a massive discovery that moves us forward in our understanding of the way in which extraterrestrial organisms might be able to survive on other planets and in space. What do you guys think? As we move past our halfway point, let's go beneath the ice all the way down to the Antarctic seafloor, where the once lost ship Endurance was discovered in impeccable condition, preserved by the country's icy waters. For a long time, the Endurance shipwreck remained one of the greatest undiscovered mysteries, but that all changed in 2022 when, at a depth of 3,008 meters, the vessel was found, and that's 9,868.8 feet. The discovery was made via a combination of helicopters, underwater robots, and other state-of-the-art technology, which allowed it to be remotely filmed and explored. Although the wreck was crushed by ice and sunk over 100 years ago, the ship's name was still clearly legible along the stern of the vessel. And this is an incredible scientific feat as it highlights the extreme advances in technology, allowing us to explore some of the most inhospitable and extreme depths of our oceans. And next up we have a freaky looking, lanky underwater insect known as the giant sea spider. While they aren't actually spiders, they are in fact part of the insect family, and they are the largest sea spider found anywhere in the world, with some showing off a leg span of up to 10 inches. Ooh. These animals belong to a rare group that have no need for a respiratory system, breathing instead through their digestive system. The animal typically feeds off anemones, seaworms, jellyfish, sponges, and soft corals, making it technically carnivorous, and it feeds using a small tube which it inserts into its soft-bodied prey, allowing it to literally suck their guts out. Gross. As for the spider's guts, those are stored in the long, spindly legs of the creature, commonly found in shallow waters surrounding Antarctica. However, they have also been spotted at depths of 7,000 meters, 23,000 feet, making them highly adaptable to changes in both pressure and environment. Next up, we have another relative giant, the giant Antarctic scale worm, which measures in at 20 centimeters, 7.8 inches long, and 10 centimeters, 4 inches wide. Now, that might not seem gigantic to you, but remember, it's a worm, so yeah, it's pretty big. And it's also super uncomfortable to look at. Well, from head on, but the underbelly is actually quite cool, looking as though the creature is lined with shiny gold feathers along its edges, which are actually appendages that help it move along rock formations and the sea floor. Its back is covered in scales that act as fully functioning body armor to protect against predators. Back to the head, which is, to put it nicely, unpleasant, and it's not even a head, really, it's just a fully retractable throat. While there is still so much we don't know about this recently discovered creature, the 2 sharp fangs on both its top and bottom jaw suggest it has a carnivorous diet and hunting rather than scavenging behavior. The animal is known to enjoy depths of up to 1,640 feet, and they're also super good for the underwater ecosystem, assisting in the building of reefs by recycling ocean waste through a process called worm composting, where they turn food scraps into other organic material that acts like soil for the sea floor. Next up, in our top 2 today, we have Mount Erebus, the world's southernmost fully active volcano that last erupted in 2020 and contains a very elusive lava lake. The lava lake sits within the volcano, and it's basically a pool of molten lava that never hardens but instead remains in a constant viscous fluid state. While you might have assumed this kind of thing to exist at the bottom of every active volcano around the world, you'd be incorrect, as they are actually incredibly rare because they require an incredibly specific set of conditions to be able to form. You see, a volcano's lava is generally held way underground in something called a magma chamber that connects to a volcano through an underground channel in the Earth's crust. And ever so often, under the right conditions, the magma chamber sends lava shooting up through the channel and the crater of the volcano into the atmosphere. A lava lake is different. It exists above ground within the crater of a volcano, and the bottom of the lake is connected to the magma chamber by a much shorter passageway called a conduit, which is basically like a long pipe. The lava from the chamber rises into the lake, and when the lava begins to cool, it moves back down towards the chamber to heat and rise once more. Thus, the lake remains unfrozen and in constant flow. Also a pretty cool sight to see. And finally, last on the list, we have ancient skulls, or at least that's what they kind of look like. These elongated skulls were allegedly found in 2016 by a team of archaeologists working in Antarctica. The discovery was shocking, and the bones dated all the way back to 1820, and it was originally believed that humans had not set foot in Antarctica until hundreds of years later. Of course, the timeline, along with the appearance of the bones, has led many to speculate that these bones are not belonging to the first humans in Antarctica, but rather the first extraterrestrials on Earth. While scientists are still baffled by the age of the bones, the shape of them didn't come as too much of a surprise to professionals, as the elongated skulls have been discovered in other places around the world and have been attributed to ritualistic physical cultural practices done by certain ancient societies. It has been said, however, that these particular skulls appear to not only be elongated, but much bigger than any to have ever been found before. So, who knows, maybe aliens aren't such a bad guess after all.
First off, we have the Bridgewater Triangle. The Bridgewater Triangle is an area about 200 square miles of southeastern Massachusetts, and there's allegedly been just some weird stuff going on there. There have been asylums here, prisons here, there have been cult deaths, there have been all kind of human activity, UFO sightings, Bigfoot sightings, strange serpents, will-o'-the-wisps, glowing balls of light, hauntings. I think these stories are not only connected to us, to our past, but to our region and to each other, an author from the area said. Yep, you heard that right, but that's not all that happens there. Giant birds or pterodactyl-like flying creatures with wingspans up to 12 feet are claimed to have been seen there. Now there are also the Native American curses. According to one story, Native Americans had cursed the swamp centuries ago because of conflict with colonial settlers. A revered object of the Wampanoag people was lost during King Philip's War. Legend says that the area owes its paranormal unrest to the fact that this belt was lost from the native people. Now, why do all these things happen at this location? People have no clue, but there's definitely something weird going on here for sure. Next up is the Mexican Altiplano metal balls. Hundreds of strange metallic-looking spheres of unknown origin and purpose have been discovered by archaeologists exploring the ruins of ancient Mesoamerican temple in Mexico. The spheres were uncovered by camera equipment robotic exploration rover on the floor of two previous sealed underground chambers in the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Now they are thought to be at least 1,800 years old and are about 1.5 to 5 inches in size. Their cores are made up of clay and other unknown organic materials, while their surfaces are covered in pyrite, also known as fool's gold, giving them a sparkly yellow coating. Now these spheres are thought to be offerings of some kind, as the temple was used by priests, but for now no one can establish their function because it is an unprecedented discovery, said archaeologist George Zalva. Moving on to the Centralia fire. The Centralia mine fire is a cold steam fire which has been burning in the labyrinth of abandoned coal mines underneath the borough of Centralia, Pennsylvania since at least May 27th, 1962. Yeah, a fire burning that long does not sound too good. It is burning at depths of up to 300 feet over an 8-mile stretch of 3,700 acres. Now at its current rate, it can continue to burn for over 200 150 years. When the fire first started, sulfurous fumes and carbon monoxide began seeping out of the ground, nearly suffocating some of the residents in their homes. Now, even more scary, the fire weakened the ground and it left it prone to sinkholes. Due to the fire in the 1980s, Centralia was mostly abandoned. There were 1,500 residents at the time the fire is believed to have started, but as of 2017, it had a population of 5, and most of the buildings had been demolished. Yeah, I don't know why anyone would still want to live there, but the fact that this fire could happen and there's no way to stop it is just so scary. Then there's the Georgia Guidestones. Located in Elbert County, Georgia, these granite monuments called the Georgia Guidestones were huge granite stones inscribed with words of advice that the author intended to guide humanity forward. Now, the creator wanted the stones to function as a compass, calendar, and clock. Meant to rival Stonehenge, R.C. Christian thought the Georgia Guidestones were superior because they had a message to communicate. The following inscriptions were sandblasted deep into the granite. Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature, guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity, unite humanity with a living new language, rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things tempered reason, protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts, let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court, avoid petty laws and useless officials, balance personal rights with social duties, prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite, and be not a cancer on earth, leave room for nature, leave room for nature. Now, the Guidestones were written in 8 different languages across 6 granite slabs. They were meant to serve as a guide for humanity in the world following a social, nuclear, or economic calamity. Now we have the unexplained lights of the Marfa. For more than 135 years, people have reported strange lights above the horizon in Marfa, Texas. No one knows exactly what they are, and that makes them both exciting and terrifying. Now, the first sighting was in 1883 when a young cowhand named Robert Reed Elson saw a mysterious dancing light as he was driving his cattle through the plain. Since then, pretty much everyone has reported seeing the pulsating, colorful balls of light along an uninhabitable stretch of prairie southeast of Marfa known as the Pasano Pass. Now, there's no way to predict when or where the lights will appear, but the glowing orbs generally form fewer than 30 times a year, usually just after the sun sets or rises. Now, some say the lights are roughly the size of basketballs and dart widely across the desert or hover as they pulsate. Others say the spheres appear colored as they twinkle in the distance. Sometimes they're red, other times they're blue, yellow, or white. Often, a second orb will appear to split, merge, float, or melt into the first, and I just need to know, what are these things? Now let's talk about the Devil's Tramping Ground. In North Carolina, there lies a barren circle of earth where nothing grows, believed by some to be cursed by the devil himself. It's alleged that the devil tramps and haunts a barren circle of ground in which nothing is supposed to grow. Legends about the ring are well known in local communities. These include the disappearance of objects left within the ring overnight, dogs freak out not wanting to go near it, and strange events occur to those who spend the night within its boundaries. Now, it has been alleged that nothing has grown within the 40-feet ring for 100 years. Supposedly, it is where the devil walks in circles on certain nights, thinking of ways to bring his evil into this world. It appears that a journalist from the Greensboro paper spent the night in a tack smack in the middle of it with his 2 dogs to disprove the story. The reporter stayed the night, though he reported hearing ghostly footsteps circling his tent. So, what is causing all this? The devil. Duh. Now we have the hum. The hum is a name given to widespread reports of persistent and invasive low-frequency humming, rumbling, or droning noise audible to many people but not all people. Now, in late 2011, residents of Windsor, Ontario began reporting a low droning vibration, sometimes loud enough to be irritating. Now, one evening in 2012 saw 22,000 reports to officials. It's estimated that the sound was emanating from Zug Island, a heavily industrialized section of River Rouge Rouge, and Canadian officials requested US assistance in determining the source, but local authorities were obstructed by official refusals to allow access to the island. A steel mill operated by US Steel was the possible cause, but officials stated that no new equipment had been installed or activated around the time that the noises became noticeable. Then there's the Teos hum. A study into the Teos hum in the early 1990s in Teos, New Mexico indicated that at least 2% could hear it, and each hearer at a different frequency between 32 Hz and 80 Hz. Now, it seemed possible for the hearers to move away from it, with one hearer of the Teos hum reporting its range was 30 miles. Now, what was causing this? We don't know, and again, I need to know. On to the Oak Money Pit. The Oak Island Money Pit is a mysterious site on Nova Scotia's Oak Island that has long been rumored to contain buried treasure. The legend of the Money Pit dates back to 1795, and what began as an innocent exploration quickly became a massive treasure hunt, with hundreds of searchers excavating the island for over 200 years. The Money Pit has been dug down more than 200 feet, but many believe the treasure lies much more deep as 500 feet. Now, as diggers have gone deeper, they've encountered multiple booby traps, such as flood tunnels and stone plugs designed to protect whatever lies at the bottom. So far, the only artifacts that have been discovered are 2 links of gold chain and a stone inscribed with the letters VI and C, which some believe stands for Viva Cristo. Now, despite these discoveries, the mystery of Money Pit remains unsolved. Many believe it contains a great treasure, while others think it may be a hoax. While hundreds of theories have been proposed, from hidden pirate booty to ancient Native American artifacts, no one knows what lies at the bottom of Oak Island Money Pit, and I'm not sure we ever will. Up next is the Well of Sacrifice. At the ancient Mayan site of the Chichen Itza, a sacred cenote known as the Well of Sacrifice, it was used for offerings and sacrifices, including human victims, as part of religious ceremonies to appease the gods. As Friar Diego de Lindana observed in 1566 after visiting Chichen Itza, into this well they have had and then had the custom of throwing men alive as a sacrifice to the gods in times of drought, and they believe that they did not die, though they never saw them again. They also threw into a great many other things, like precious stones and things which they prized. And so, if this country had possessed gold, it would be this well that would have a great part of it. Now, Edward Herbert Thompson dredged the cenote from 1904 to 1910, and he recovered artifacts of gold, jade, pottery, and incense, as well as human remains. And lastly, we have the Zone of Silence. The Zone of Silence is a spot in the Mapimi Biosphere Reserve in Durango, Mexico, where radio and TV signals allegedly do not work. The name was only assigned to this place in 1966 when oil company Pemex sent some people to explore the area. The expedition leader, Augusto Harry de la Pena, encountered problems with his radio, giving it the name. In 1970, an American missile fired from the White Sands Missile Base somehow went off course and landed right in the middle of the reserve, 400 miles south of its intended target. Since then, similar stories have been reported by residents and tourists alike. In the 1930s, a Mexican pilot named Francisco Sabera said that his radio failed to function when flying over the zone. Now, aside from radio signals, telecommunication signals also seem to fall within this area. There are also reports that compasses turn out of control when positioned near the stone on the ground. Large meteorites also landed near the Zone of Silence, and several theories have been made trying to explain these phenomena, but people think it has something to do with some sort of paranormal activity.
We're starting off the list with this video captured in 2017 in British Columbia, Canada. This is a video, but it's the sound that really matters here. So it was early in the morning, 8:30 a.m. on December 16th in Whitsett, British Columbia. And this dude started filming the tree line when he heard an absolutely nightmarish sound echoing through the trees, far off in the distance. Take a listen to this. How frightening is that? Now sure, there are a lot of animals in British Columbia. One commenter said this sounds like it could be a mountain lion call. Not sure about that myself. I've never spent time in British Columbia, to be fair, but I've watched videos of mountain lion vocalizations and this doesn't sound like that to me. But what do you guys think? To me this sounds like a banshee. Could also be an elk. Elk makes some pretty creepy noises. Take a listen to that. Like, that's pretty cool, right? Sounds like one of the dinosaurs from Jurassic Park. Anyway, whether the creature in this video is Bigfoot, a ghost, or just a known animal, it's a freaky sound any way you slice it, and I would not want to hear that walking through the woods alone. Alright, this next story is pretty nuts. It was posted to Reddit by Donna Hotter Than a Sauna, and she talks about a run-in she and her boyfriend had with a gator. Actually, 2 gators. Anyway, goes like this. My boyfriend and I were walking through the woods on a nature trail when we came across a piece of alligator tail and foot that had been ripped and the rest of the body was gone. I freaked out. All I kept thinking was, I have no idea what's big enough to kill and eat an entire alligator, but I don't want to meet it. We cautiously kept walking, and a few hundred feet later saw a giant, probably 10 foot at least, alligator walking along the shoreline with a whole smaller dead alligator in its mouth. You know what's extra terrifying about that story? So they came across a huge alligator, right, that was hungry enough to eat one of its own kind. If they'd been on that walk just a little earlier, may have found them instead. Freaky stuff. Next up, we have the incredibly odd case of the Oakville Blobs. So the Oakville Blobs case was a very bizarre incident that happened in Oakville, Washington in 1994, and I cannot believe I've never heard of this case until today. Like, where have I been? What have I been doing with my life? So this is basically the real life version of the blob. These gelatinous like globs started falling from the sky, and the even scarier part is that they weren't just harmless goo. The blobs actually started making people sick. They experienced symptoms like nausea, dizziness, and respiratory issues. And when scientists looked at the blobs under a microscope, they found something even more strange. There were human white blood cells in them. Cells from our immune system were in these gooey raindrops. Like, what? What is this? How have I not heard of this before? And if you're hoping for some kind of closure to this story, that's too bad, because they've never been definitively identified. Alright, I got some cool Bigfoot footage for you next. This list is gonna be a bit all over the place, but you know, hey, the world's forests are just full of surprises. So this piece of footage was taken by Todd Standing, who's captured some pretty intriguing Bigfoot footage over the years, but this may be his most convincing. Here he saw an ape-like creature peeking out from a tree root, and he was able to focus in and get some pretty clear footage of its face. Take a look. Just look at the skin, the blinking eyes, like the subtle movements. It looks like a real face to me. Now, could it be a guy painted up with some fake fur attached to his head? Maybe. I mean, this could totally very well be a well-executed hoax. But there's also a chance it could be a real animal, too. Next up, we head to the Hessdalen Valley in Norway to discuss unidentified lights periodically spotted in the sky since the 1930s. The Hessdalen lights are this mysterious glowing phenomena that show up in the Hessdalen Valley. Sometimes they're seen during the day, sometimes at night. They can be white, yellow, or red, and have been seen above and below the horizon. They can last for just a few seconds or go on for more than an hour. Sometimes they zip around really fast, other times they sway back and forth, and occasionally they just hang in the air. The lights became especially frequent between 1981 and 84, happening up to 20 times a week. People started traveling to the area hoping to see them, but by 2010 the sightings had decreased to about 10 to 20 per year. In 1998 though, the Hessdalen Automatic Measurement Station, or the Hessdalen AMS, was set up in the valley. It was designed to keep track of and record the mysterious lights when they showed up. Until this day though, they're still not 100% sure what causes them. Next up, we have the discovery of the Saula. Now, this one may not have terrified scientists as much as get them super excited, but anytime a cryptid is found to actually exist, it's pretty incredible. This creature, native to the Annamite Mountains in Vietnam and Laos, has a couple nicknames, the Asian unicorn and the Vu Quang ox. It is an incredibly rare animal, and for a long time, it was completely unknown to the outside world, a mythological creature at best. But in 1992, these animals were discovered to actually exist, at least to researchers outside of the region anyway, and the first photograph of a Saula was taken in 1993. Did you notice that flap on the face that like flares out almost like the gill of a fish? Very strange. Cool animals. Next up, we have the whale in the jungle. And no, that's not some bizarre figure of speech. There really was a beached whale found in the Amazon jungle in 2019. This was an incredibly unexpected discovery made on Marajo Island at the mouth of the Amazon River. A 36-foot humpback whale weighing 10 tons was discovered all the way up into the jungle. The whale was a 12-month-old calf and was hidden in the undergrowth about 50 feet from the sea. So experts were pretty confused about how the whale made its way so deep into the jungle. One possible explanation is that rough seas might have tossed the creature out of the water and into the woods, but those must have been some pretty powerful waves. Darlene Silva from SEMA, the Brazilian Environmental Department, explained that the whale was found because scavenging birds were circling above the hidden carcass in the bush. Renita Emin, a marine specialist, was pretty surprised by the find as well, saying, "We're still not sure how it landed here, but we're guessing that the creature was floating close to the shore, and the tide, which has been pretty considerable over the past few days, picked it up and threw it inland into the mangrove." What's also strange about this though is that the humpback whales are usually found in the Bahia area from August to November, so how did one end up on the north coast of Brazil in February? Whales usually migrate to Antarctica after their time in Bahia, so it just makes this find even more strange. Let's talk about more creepy noises though, coming from the woods. Here's another. This video was posted to YouTube by Chris Simpkins, who heard this strange metallic sound coming from the woods near his home one night. Take a listen to this. Yeah, that's a bit creepy, ain't it? The video was taken on September 6th, 2016, about 8 p.m. in North Smithfield, Rhode Island. In the video description, Chris dispels some theories people had about what the sound could have been, writing, "There was almost no wind last night. We've lived here for a year and never heard this before. Even during the windiest of days, there aren't any trains nearby. And the background noise is just crickets/frogs in my yard, and maybe me crying a bit behind the phone." Anyway, let us know in the comments what you think of this one. Is it aliens? Is there some kind of power tool that can make a noise like that? Let us know what you think. Now, this next story may not sound like much to some of you, but I find this one pretty unsettling, and I wanted to throw it in. I think some of the scariest things we can come across is the absence of anything. Complete silence and isolation. And Reddit user I Don't Care, I Like Dogs made a post about exactly that. They write, "I live in a really remote part of Alaska. I think the scariest thing I've ever encountered is how silent the woods tundra can be in the dead of winter. I'm talking like I feel I'm about to go insane quiet. It's absolutely unnerving. I became hyper aware of my heartbeat, and my breathing sounds like an effing airplane taking off. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, it's because a predator was nearby. No, man, some places up here just have nothing. That's what really freaks me out. I am absolutely alone in this one spot. I could drop dead and no one would ever find my body." And yeah, I just find that kind of unsettling. And finally, we have the lost city of Z. Percy Harrison Fawcett was a British explorer who set out in 1925 to find the lost city he called Z in the Amazon rainforest. Fawcett believed this ancient city held all these untold riches and a sophisticated civilization. Accompanied by his son Jack and friend Rayleigh Rimmel, Fawcett ventured into uncharted territory never to be seen again. The expedition vanished without a trace, and there were tons of rescue attempts, including one by famed aviator Charles Lindbergh, but no sign of Fawcett or his companions has ever been found. One theory is that Fawcett just died as a result of all the harsh stuff out there in the jungle. Could have been eaten by an animal or something. Definitely very likely, but there's a more interesting and more intriguing theory that he and his crew may have actually found this lost city deep within the Amazon where they started a new life, living happily ever after down there. Over the years, there have been expeditions that set out to uncover the fate of Fawcett and the lost city of Z, but the Amazon is dense and dangerous, and to this day, the fate of Fawcett and the existence of this lost city still a mystery. And we're starting things off with the discovery of possibly the oldest art in the world. Now, the common belief is that Homo sapiens were the first human species to create art, but a finding in 2014 showed that that may not have been the case at all. Archaeologists may have found ancient art created by not our species, but by our distant ancestor, Homo erectus. Previously, we thought that the earliest evidence of sophisticated art dated back around 70 to 100,000 years ago, crafted by Homo sapiens. But in 2014, a shell engraved with geometric patterns was discovered in a riverbank in Indonesia. It was dated to be at least 430,000 years old and believed to have been made by Homo erectus. So Homo erectus was never thought to have been artistic in any way. Now, am I saying the art on this shell was like a breathtaking piece? No, I mean, it's zigzags etched into a shell, but it's pretty cool that this may have been created by an extinct species of human. This pushes back the timeline for complex cognitive abilities much further than we thought before, and it changes the idea that modern human behavior, in this case artistic expression and abstract thought, just suddenly came about in a burst of evolutionary innovation around 100 to 200,000 years ago. Instead, it looks like some of what we consider modern may have been around in our ancestors hundreds of thousands of years earlier. And speaking of extinct human species, there are also recent findings that point to Homo naledi possibly being more intelligent than we thought and doing stuff like burying their dead. Originally discovered in a South African cave system, these 300,000-year-old hominins were thought to have had a mix of human and pre-human features, but not much else. But recent evidence points to them having possibly been way more complex than we thought before. There's evidence that Homo naledi may have intentionally buried their dead. The idea has always been that only modern humans did that. Even more interesting are the engravings found on cave walls. Now, the age of the marks hasn't been determined to a T. If they were created by Homo naledi, it would mean they would have a level of artistic expression and brain power that, once again, we thought was unique to Homo sapiens. Now, to be fair, Homo naledi had very small brains, so that's not just us being arrogant. It makes sense that we always thought they were just kind of dumb apes. Next up, we have new revelations about the hunting practices of foraging societies. So here's what we've always been taught in school, right? The men in ancient tribes would always be the ones out hunting while the women stayed home. And it turns out that may not be the case. Now, while it is true that men would have been hunting the majority of the time, there's recent evidence that points to women having hunted in about 80% of foraging societies around the world. And in a third of those societies, women were even taking down big game. So this particular finding started with a comprehensive review led by Carl Welsh Scheffler at the University of Washington, who delved deep into over 1,400 human societies worldwide, spanning over 150 years of studies. Now, as for why we haven't really heard much about this before, it seems there's just been a bit of a bias. The idea that men are the hunters and women stick to gathering has been so ingrained in our minds that it's just always how evidence has been interpreted. But now with this wealth of data, it's becoming more clear that women have been active participants in the hunt all along. What's also really fascinating is how flexible women's hunting strategies were. They weren't confined to one tool or method. They were using bows and arrows, knives, nets, spears, and in some cases, they were even hunting with their young strapped to their backs. Next up, we have a discovery made in 2023 of a very old Viking burial, really changing our understanding of Scandinavian history. So this mound, known as Harlagshagen, was believed to be a typical Viking Age burial site, but turns out there's more to it than that. Surveys of the mound uncovered large rivets, which confirmed that this was the site of a ship burial. Now, that's not surprising on its own, cool, but not surprising. This is Scandinavia, after all. What is surprising, though, is the date. It was dated to around 700 AD, which predates the Viking Age by several decades. This makes Harlagshagen the oldest known ship burial in Scandinavia, and it means that the tradition of burying people in large ships began much earlier than historians once thought. It also shows that the maritime skills and technology of the region were more advanced than we thought before as well, even before the Viking Age. Next on the list we have the Diary of Merer. It used to be a pretty common belief that the Great Pyramids were built by slaves, being yelled at and whipped as they uncomfortably hauled massive mounds of limestone, but this version of events may not be accurate, and it all changed with the discovery of the Diary of Merer, an ancient papyrus with details about how the ancient Egyptians built these structures and the lives of the workers who built them. Merer was an official who oversaw a team responsible for transporting limestone blocks from quarries to the construction site of the Great Pyramid of Giza. His diary, dated to around 4,500 years ago, had all these meticulous details of the daily operations involved in this construction. What's surprising is that Merer's diary mentions the workers being well fed and cared for, contradicting that image we have of brutal slavery often thought to be the case. Instead of slaves, it looks like the builders were skilled laborers and may have actually been compensated for their work. So there you go. Now you can rest easy at night knowing one of the 7 wonders of the world was built in an ethical way. Unless he was just lying in all those writings to make it all look better for like people discovering it in the future, you know? News of this next archaeological breakthrough was just released in 2023, and for those of you not keeping track of time, that's last year. So, human fossils were found in the Tampa Ling cave in Laos that may change researchers' understanding of human migration into Australia. These fossils were found buried deep in the cave's sediment layers, giving us very important evidence that links the journey of early humans from Africa through Southeast Asia and eventually into Australia. The common belief has always been that human migration happened mostly through sea routes, but these human remains were found in a cave 186 miles inland in 2009, so that had scientists second-guessing things. Using luminescence dating techniques, researchers were able to figure out a timeline, revealing the oldest fossils could have been between 68 and 86,000 years old, which pushes back the estimated arrival of humans in Southeast Asia by quite a bit. The findings could also mean that modern humans likely traveled through forested areas, possibly following river valleys on their journey from Africa to Asia and eventually to Australia. Were all the high-ranking members of society in ancient Europe always men? History has always taught us that was the case, but it turns out that Bronze Age Spain may have had women in powerful positions. Back in 2021, a pretty cool discovery was made in Spain. The discovery was of a woman's remains, and it looked like she'd been a ruling elite. Located beneath a Bronze Age ruin at a site in Murcia, Spain, the woman had been buried along with valuable objects like a rare silver crown. There were also the remains of a man buried along with her, and he didn't have anything cool on him. He was just a bunch of bones. This ruin was also found to have possibly been the earliest palace discovered in Western Europe from the Bronze Age. The crown wasn't the only evidence that this woman had been in a position of power. It was also the location of her burial. She'd been beneath a room with a large building complex that looked to have been both residential and political. Basically, the place could have been a palace. Next on the list, we have the bronze statues. So in 2022, statues dating back 2,300 years were discovered, and they were unlike anything seen before in Italy or even the Mediterranean. Led by archaeologist Jacob Taboli, the excavation team found 24 beautifully preserved bronze statues, including figures of gods like Hygeia and Apollo. They were also adorned with inscriptions honoring important Etruscan families. It looked as if the statues might have been submerged in the thermal waters as part of some religious ceremony, which helped keep them in such fantastic condition over the centuries that people of that time had been praying together and honoring their gods in these ancient baths. Now, what was fascinating about this discovery is that it looks like the Etruscans and Romans may have been closer than what we once thought. Next on the list, we have the possible discovery, heavy emphasis on possible, the possible discovery of Amelia Earhart's plane. So you probably heard about this in the news about a month back. People are pretty excited about this one, and if it does turn out that Amelia Earhart's plane has been found, this will put an end to a decades-old mystery. A man named Tony Romeo, the CEO of Deep Sea Vision, led a team to the Pacific Ocean, close to Howland Island, where they captured sonar images using an underwater drone. They scanned 5,200 square miles of the ocean floor, and they captured what looks to be an aircraft looking similar to Amelia Earhart's Lockheed 10E Electra. Now, some say the wings, or what look like wings in the sonar image, look different than Earhart's plane. They're kind of like backward. And sure, there's totally a chance this is a different aircraft, but the wings could have also been damaged, and that's why they look to be bent back like that. At this point, we really don't know, but there's going to be an expedition later this year to see if this really is her plane. So we just gotta hold out for a little while. And we're finishing off today's list with a pretty incredible discovery made in Brazil. It all started in 2019 when a team of archaeologists were called in to inspect what seemed like a routine construction project at an apartment complex. But as they dug deeper, they stumbled on human bones, along with this trove of ancient relics. And it all dated back thousands of years, some as far as 9,000. And there were over 100,000 artifacts in total, along with 43 human skeletons. And what was also really interesting is that these findings spanned layers of history. Each layer was a different civilization that once lived in the region. About 6.5 feet below the surface, archaeologists discovered remnants of a group that existed around 8,000 to 9,000 years ago. And this was incredibly interesting because it pushed back the timeline of humans settling in Brazil by quite a bit. The team's been working for 4 years at the site, and this finding could rewrite history, changing what anthropologists used to believe about when humans migrated into the Americas from Asia.
Starting us off at number 10 is the monster study. In 1939, speech pathologists at the University of Iowa set out to prove their theory that stuttering was a learned behavior that was caused by a child's anxiety towards speaking aloud. So how did they go about testing this theory? Well, for starters, all the subjects were orphans, and they told these impressionable minds that they were going to be receiving speech therapy. From there, they split the 22 orphans down the middle, providing half of the subjects with positive reinforcement and praise of their speech fluency, while the other half was belittled for making any kind of speech imperfections. Essentially, the negative half was told that they were doomed to start stuttering once they began to speak, and then told that they were stuttering even if they weren't. So just straight up mind games. Once the seed was planted, they would sit down with the orphans and insist they did not speak unless they would be able to speak right, meaning without a stutter, despite the fact that most of them never stuttered to begin with. Eventually, the orphans began shutting down, some refusing to speak entirely, all based on a false accusation. The entire experiment caused an insane amount of psychological harm to the students, and some even developed speech impediments through the sheer gaslighting of being told they had one. Coming in at number 9 is the Milgram experiment. Named after the psychologist Stanley Milgram, who spearheaded the experiment, this study began in the summer of 1961 and looked at testing the limits of obedience. Many academics at the time wanted to take a look into what was at the core of an authoritative personality, and how someone could be swayed to commit something that they didn't want to do simply because they believed they had to. Once the study began, 2 groups were made. One group was assigned to be actors, and the other group was tasked with shocking the person in the room after they answered a question wrong. What group 2 didn't know was that group 1 was not actually being shocked, just acting as if they were. As it turns out, an incredibly high proportion of the subjects continued to shock the group despite thinking they were hurting them, simply because they felt they had no other choice. But later, another scientist thought the experiment needed to be amped up, as he hypothesized people could have felt the victims were faking it. This new study included real-life dogs as the subjects being shocked, and test subjects apparently openly wept while still following orders to shock the dogs. I mean, first of all, why bring the sweet puppies into this? And secondly, the psychological harm that was caused by these people feeling forced to harm others is just evil. Coming in at number 8 is Kurt Blohm. One of the many evil scientists during World War II was Kurt Blohm. And just like the rest of them, he too performed indescribable acts on the prisoners in hopes to further scientific understanding. Or at least, that's what was being said at the time. His main choice of torture was purposefully injecting the prisoners with cancer and typhus. But not because they were looking on how to cure it, no, they literally were looking on how to best cause it. The reason behind that was that Blom was in charge of all biological warfare in the SS, and so his experiments aimed to find the best way to use these diseases against their enemies, debilitating them. I mean, bio-warfare as a whole is an insane concept. Like, just imagine researching how to best infect your enemies with an incurable disease in order to win a war. It's so wild to me. But what is truly mind-blowing about the whole situation is that despite being arrested and put on the doctor's trial for his evil doings in 1947, and admitting to what he had done, the US intervened in his prosecution for wartime atrocities and got him off the hook. From there, the US Army Chemical Corps hired him to work on biological warfare projects in their country. So not only did he get away with his evil experiments, he continued on with them for another country's benefit. Coming in at number 7 is J. Marion Sims. Widely regarded as the father of modern gynecology, Dr. Sims gained most of his fame from doing experimental surgeries on slave women in the mid-1800s. He's quite a controversial character in medical history for several reasons, because while he did provide advancements like the invention of the speculum and developed new surgical techniques for dealing with the female anatomy, he also performed on unconsenting slaves without anesthesia. And not to mention, the reason he didn't use anesthesia was not because it wasn't available to him. It was because he believed that the operations were, quote, not painful enough to justify the trouble. Further, there were several of his patients who suffered extreme complications. One woman almost died from sepsis after a sponge was left inside her, and another woman was performed on a total of 30 times. Many in the medical community have condemned his work as they feel he was manipulating the social institution of slavery to perform human experimentation, and that despite what he may have discovered, countless women were tortured in order to do so. Coming in at number 6 is Karl Klauberg. Another horrible scientist during World War II, back in 1942, Klauberg approached Heinrich Himmler, who was a major figure in the German party at the time, and asked if he could receive a large number of women for research purposes. From there, his proposal was accepted, so off to the cruel camp he went. Once he was there, the so-called research began. I mean, truthfully, it was really more human torture under the guise of science. I'm sure you're wondering, just what was Klauberg experimenting? Well, he wanted to figure out how to sterilize women in the most cost-efficient way, so he would inject formaldehyde directly into their stomachs without any painkillers. He experimented on thousands of prisoners, but only 700 survived, although all were left sterile. Now, as I'm sure you can put together, the reason behind this forced sterilization had to do with eugenics, but on top of putting formaldehyde in the victims, he also mentally tortured his patients too. In order to make sure that the experiment had worked, he needed to inseminate them to make sure that they wouldn't conceive. But for an extra layer of cruelty, he would tell his patients that he injected them with animal sperm to try and create a monster. Coming in at number 5, the Tuskegee study. Back in 1932, the United States Public Health Service began to dive into the natural progression of syphilis if left untreated. And while that is very valuable knowledge to know about in order to prevent complications in the future, there are definitely better ways to go about it. In this study, 600 poor and illiterate men, of which only 399 previously had syphilis, were hired, and none were told about what the experiment was going to be for, or that they had a life-threatening disease to begin with. The 600 men were instead told that they were actually receiving free healthcare, meals, and burial insurance in exchange for participating. What's even more sick is that even though penicillin was proven to be an effective cure in 1947, the study continued all the way until 1972, essentially needlessly infecting hundreds of people and watching them die of a disease that already had a cure. It's just insane that this went on for so long, and it definitely is one of the most evil experiments to have seen the light of day. Coming in at number 4 is the Stanford prison experiment. Probably one of the most notorious experiments ever recorded is the 1971 Stanford experiment. In 1971, Philip Zimbardo set out to test the nature of human nature, specifically what happens when you put good people in evil situations. To do so, he set up a 2 2-week study and paid college students $15 a day to play guards and prisoners. The day prior to the official start, those assigned as guards were given an orientation and provided uniforms. The next day, those assigned as prisoners were mock arrested by the police, a detail that utterly blindsided participants, and taken to the jail for the study to begin. Immediately upon arrival, they were dehumanized, forced into a strip search, given an ID number, and sent to their cells. Nearly immediately, things got out of hand. By day 2, guards were harassing the inmates with psychological and physical abuse, and prisoners were attempting to rebel against their treatment, which only exacerbated the abuse, prompting the guards to strip the prisoners of their uniforms, take their mattresses, and force them to relieve themselves in buckets. On the 3rd day, alliances were being formed, offering rewards to prisoners with good behavior, and by the 4th day, full-on riots were breaking out. Things escalated so badly that the experiment ended on the 6th day, a whole week before it was scheduled to end. While incredibly controversial, the Stanford prison experiment has been the basis of psychologists and even historians' understanding of how even healthy people can become evil when placed in certain situations. Next up at number 3 is the Willowbrook experiments. In the 1950s, one institution ran a very, very dark experiment that I honestly can't quite believe was able to happen even then. The institution was for young disabled people, specifically those deemed to have a mental illness or a mental disorder at the time, and due to highly unsanitary conditions in the institution, many contracted hepatitis. You would think this would maybe make them go, maybe we should tidy up around here, protect those that are under our care. But that was not quite their approach. Instead, Dr. Sal Krugman proposed an experiment to try and develop a vaccine. Now, while I can appreciate the thought that was behind his proposition, rather than testing on the already contracted citizens, they actually began purposefully infecting people with the disease to assist in the experiment. Now, don't get it twisted, there were many folks against this from the start, but ultimately parents of the admitted people gave their permission to affect them and use them in the study, so forth they went. Kind of crazy to believe that someone would actually go along with that, but apparently they didn't seem to care too much about infecting disabled people with a deadly disease. So there you have it. Coming in at number 2 is Dr. Sigmund Rascher. As we have covered by this point, there were many evil scientists researching cruel experiments during World War II, and one of the worst doctors of the time was Dr. Sigmund Rascher. When he joined the army, he asked the leader if human subjects could be provided at his disposal, and by 1942, his wishes were granted. He began conducting experiments in pressure chambers where he would simulate a high altitude and then quickly alter the pressure to simulate the conditions of a pilot free-falling with no oxygen. But he was most well known for his cruel freezing experiments on 300 prisoners, supposedly to figure out the best way to warm up soldiers who experienced hypothermia. He would either force his victims to remain outdoors, completely naked in freezing temperatures for up to 14 hours, or would place them in tanks of ice for 3 hours, measuring their pulse and internal temperatures all the while. From there, they would warm up their victims, experimenting with a variety of different temperatures, including boiling water, often causing further harm. Along with his other forms of torture, Sigmund would also administer polygal, a substance to aid in blood clotting, and then shoot or amputate a limb on his victim to see the speed at which they would bleed out. I mean, you have to wonder what happens to someone in their life to make them this cruel and evil. And last up today in our number 1 spot is Shiro Ishii and Unit 731. During the 30s and 40s, notorious microbiologist and surgeon Shiro Ishii led the development and application of biological warfare for the infamous Unit 731. Shiro had long awaited to develop biological warfare, something that was against the Geneva Convention at the time, so in 1936, when he was promoted to senior army surgeon and granted full control over Unit 731, Shiro Ishii unleashed all evil. With no one to tell him no, Ishii began his evil experiments on live humans, as he believed he could not get the results he was looking for by testing on animals. Ishii was notorious for injecting his subjects with deadly diseases under the guise of vaccines so that he could watch and study the effects if left untreated, leaving his victims suffering horrifying symptoms and eventually letting them die. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. Victims of his evil experiments would also have limbs amputated and reattached to other parts of their bodies while conscious and without the use of any anesthesia, or be put into pressure chambers until their eyes literally escaped their skull. It's estimated that nearly 10,000 people died at the hands of Shiro Ishii's cruel experiments. But perhaps most insane of all is that after the war ended, he was never charged with any war crimes, as he traded the information obtained from his experiments for immunity and lived out the remainder of his life in Japan a free man.